Working Cows Podcast, episode 389. This episode is brought to you by C90 Ocean Minerals.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. This is Clay Conry, host of the Working Cows Podcast, recorded exclusively in the Understanding Ag Studios. And this episode is brought to you by C90 Ocean Minerals. C90 Ocean Minerals, the leading mineral and trace element sea salt for your herd, is now available nationwide at Tractor Supply Company. We're excited to bring the incredible benefits of our mineral-rich sea salt to more farmers and ranchers across the country. To find your closest Tractor Supply location, visit us at c-90.com/tractor today. Trouble with flies? Select stores also carry C90 mineral salt with garlic for fly control. Learn more today at c-90.com/tractor. Very excited to be joined by Dr. Tom Roskos today. Dr. Tom is from Wisconsin, and if you know anything about Wisconsin, that's a place where they get quite a bit of moisture, and talking about herd health always becomes a major concern in places where there is more moisture than places maybe where it's a little drier and facing parasite loads and all kinds of things like that. And so we're going to talk to him about some more integrated approaches to herd health and some of the things that he's found that work maybe outside of the mainstream approach. So Dr. Tom, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Clay. It's a pleasure to be here, and hopefully I can provide some insights from my perspective.
Yeah, certainly. And that perspective comes from a career in animal care, as I understand it. Can you tell us a little bit about that and where you're at in the world?
Yes. So I'm in Western Wisconsin. I'm in veterinary practice, large animal veterinary practice, and I've been doing this for 41 years. Doesn't seem that long, but I have been. Lifelong farmer. I started out and then still on the same farm that I grew up on. So I have, along with my wife and my son, we have a herd of beef cows, 50 beef cows. We have some sheep, we have some goats, and we have some organic cropland.
Yeah, very good. And what are you, when you think about herd health and you think about taking care of livestock, cattle, sheep, what's kind of your perspective, or how do you see the goal of that enterprise?
When I look at the goal that we're kind of all trying to attain when we're in agriculture, regardless of the species that we're working with, I see it as we're trying to obviously have profitability with it. And profitability, in my mind, comes from increasing efficiencies, whether it be in feed conversion. It would be increasing reproductive efficiencies, which would be very, very important. And it would be working within the line of having maximum growth or maximum production, along while maintaining good health.
Sure. Is there a lower bound and an upper limit to where reproductive efficiency, below this number, you really need to take a look at it, and above this number, maybe you're spending too much on inputs, or how do you think about those things?
There's so many things that go into that I'm somewhat concerned about picking a particular number. I mean, for me, within beef cow herds, you target 100%, but is that realistic or not? Typically, I think if you can be in that 90 to 95% in terms of wean calves is a good target. But within that, it's hard to say that a particular input or one particular thing is what's making the difference. So I like to view things kind of more as a totality, or looking at an entire operation. And depending on resources, depending on particular situations, sometimes putting more money towards something is not necessarily going to be better. Very often it's a matter of making good choices, making choices of what is going to be the best investment that you can within the framework of the operation that you have and the resources that you have.
Right. And we're talking about, managing the whole there, feeds, feeding, environment, husbandry, management practices, genetics, all that. The feeding piece of that kind of interests me. Is there something about the way that people are feeding or feeding strategies that can make a difference one way or the other in your experience?
Yes, very, very much so. In any operation, I think it's playing to the strong suit of what your particular land base can do or your particular area can do. And I feel that if you are in the position where you have your own cropland or you have your own rangeland, then it's what decisions can you make, what inputs can you do to those to be able to improve nutrient density or the amount of production that you can get off of pasture and such. In terms of feeding types of different methods that people feed their livestock. It can be something as simple as, can you preserve the nutrient value that you have, say, in round bales? Might be something as simple as having them covered or stored. Again, there's that looking at that investment part. People say, well, it's an expense to take good care of the feed. It's an expense to have a proper method of feeding. It's an expense to have a proper way of reducing the amount of waste that you have with what you are feeding. So that's part of it. But going back to it again, that increasing nutrient density, being able to maximize the feedstuffs that you have. If you're in a situation where you're buying your feedstuffs, then again, it can be related to how much things cost. But again, quality matters. To be able to have products that are going into your livestock that's going to give you the best ability for them to thrive.
Yeah, are there other examples of that you would say we need to start looking at this as an investment rather than an expense, or maybe even some things that we would typically use that really are just an expense? They're not actually pushing any levers for us and giving us more leverage.
Yes, the way that I would look at it on a real basic level is, if you need to fix things, those are expenses. And it might seem a little odd for a veterinarian to say that a lot of what I have done in veterinary practice over the years has been an expense for farmers, because they're calling because of something that could have been prevented, that they might have done things in the past or in their processes or in their management that would have made it not necessary for them to call me. On the same token, if you look at that as an example, if they're calling, and I, as a veterinarian, and this would apply for people that are consultants, people that are nutritionists, if the money is being spent towards getting ideas as to preventative practices, recommendations, tap into people's strong suits, tap into things that you don't know yourself, to be able to have a better base of information. Definitely subscribe to the thought of surround yourself with people that are smarter than you. And I certainly try to do that.
Well, it's easier for some of us than others, that's for sure. But that is that's an interesting way of looking at that. Expenses are things that we're spending to fix problems, possibly created by our management, maybe not, but possibly. And investments are things that we're using to avoid those problems in the first place, basically, is what I hear you saying.
Correct.
Yeah.
Within that, you're never going to be 100%. I have one farmer that says, you're never going to bowl a 300, but you're always going to try. Get as close as you can. And using the veterinary part of it, there's always going to be issues where things don't turn out as they're supposed to be and such. But it's having that mindset, I think, of what can you do, how can you do things that is going to provide for the best opportunity for success.
Sure. Yeah. And with regard to that, and given your expertise, like to focus a little bit on the health component. of our cattle? What are some of the kind of baseline things that we need to start looking at and thinking about from a health perspective as far as our cattle are concerned?
Well, when it comes to cattle health, certainly have evolved in my way of thinking, evolved in my approach to how that's accomplished. And I have to say that it is wonderful that we live in a day and age now where there is so much information that is available. The plus side of that, in what I find, is that I can access research just sitting by my iPad, and I can get a lot of questions answered. The downside of that is not all information that is out there is going to be good information. There's a lot of poor information that you can find. So it's a matter of having the discernment to know, what's good and what's not. When I'm looking at how my thinking has evolved, and this has been something that I ponder, something that's rather interesting. Growing up on a farm and being very active in the outdoors, being very involved with livestock and cropping all my life, in the past, it seemed like it was fairly simple. And going through these years of veterinary practice and watching the evolution in agriculture, it seems like in one way we are getting better and better and better always at increasing production. So our production from our dairy cows is just phenomenal. It's something never would have dreamt of 40 years ago. If we look at our yields and our crops, I can remember when it was something very special for one farmer in the U.S. to grow 300 bushel corn. You look at what we do with our poultry, how quickly they become meat birds within a matter of 31 or 32 days. And it seems like, okay, we really have this figured out. But the part that I get concerned about is that we, by doing this, have moved farther and farther away from the way that things normally would operate within our livestock or within our fields. And, I tend to ponder, if you look at creation, if you just look at the wonder of creation, there's nothing simple about it. It is very, very diverse. It's ever expanding. It's very, very integrated. Everything is related to everything else. And I just feel that we are coming to a point in time where, whether it's our animal health, probably more so when it's human health, that we are going to have that recognition that we need to take care of our animals, ourselves, our soils, and our environment differently than what we are now. And, it's like you say, it's paradoxical, because people can certainly make the argument that, well, how is this not working? Because we are so efficient right now. But I can also see where there will be a time, and hopefully it's people that have some of this awareness that can bring things back to what actually is a simpler way of doing things.
Yeah. When we let the animals express themselves, right? When we let chickens be chickens and pigs be pigs and cows be cows, rather than trying to do all of that for them, there's a lot of, I think, unintended consequences on both sides of that. There's things that we don't know that they're capable of, that they do, and that then they give us a better end product, a more nutrient-dense end product. And I think the opposite is true on the other end, that we get a less nutrient-dense end product when we start to try and give them everything, when we start to provide everything for them, rather than letting them go out and select the things that their body is telling them they need in that moment. Is that too far out, or is that kind of what I hear you saying?
That's very spot on. Yes, very spot on. There's an innate intelligence there that, given the opportunity, they will be able to make decisions what's best for them. Couple examples for that. And I think when we talk to our folks that have animals on range or have animals on pasture, That is in my opinion, a good example of things that have the potential to work well. Granted, I understand, being a farmer, I understand weather, I understand droughts, floods, and all those sorts of things. But when animals have the ability to pick and choose what they want to eat when, they can cure a lot of things. In early years in vet practice, I was primarily dairy area, primarily small dairies. Everything got fixed when cattle went on pasture. And these were not intensively managed pastures. It wasn't the intentional or the intensive rotational grazing that we see now, where it's a limited number of species. But these are pastures that were just out there, land that they couldn't crop, and it had every assortment of weed and grass and whatever out there. And these animals, they pick and choose what they want, and magically they end up in better health. So I use that as a bit of an example. Within the framework of the way that we feed now, I guess where I've come to it is we most likely are not going to ever get back to that situation where we have our dairy cattle on 50 cow herds going out on pasture. But within feeding them, I kind of approach it a little bit like I approach eating myself, is that I want to eat enough things with enough diversity and to allow the body to be able to make those choices. Because there's an intelligence within our cells, there's an intelligence within ourselves that make it possible to be able to maintain health, in my opinion, with that.
Yeah.
And there again, that'll kind of feed back into what I was talking about, investment versus expense.
Yeah.
If we can invest in those things that provide the opportunity for the animal to do the best and maintain the best that it can.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, C90 Ocean Minerals. C90 Ocean Minerals, the leading mineral and trace element sea salt for your herd, is now available nationwide at Tractor Supply Company. We're excited to bring the incredible benefits of our mineral-rich sea salt to more farmers and ranchers across the country. To find your closest Tractor Supply location, visit us at c-90.com/tractor today. Trouble with flies? Select stores also carry C90 mineral salt with garlic for fly control. Learn more today at c-90.com/tractor. Yeah, could you tell me a little bit about your evolution? You were kind of alluding to it earlier, about kind of where you were and where you are now and how you think about some of these things.
Sure. It's been interesting when you go to vet school, and this is back in the late 70s, early 80s anyway. Things have changed a bit, I know. But you're trained very, what I would use the word conventionally. You have the physiology, you have the pharmacology, and it is, okay, this is used to treat this. This is all you need to feed an animal, and this is all that they need. And as I've gone through practice, it was a little bit driven by farmers, by my clients. They started to get into the organic production paradigm. In Western Wisconsin, we have the home headquarters of Organic Valley, which is a very large dairy cooperative, an organic dairy cooperative. So I was faced with the challenge of how do you take care of animals organically? Because it felt very much like I did not have the tools. I couldn't use the tools that I was accustomed to using. And so one can do one of two things. You either accept the challenge or else you back away from it. And I accepted the challenge and started to do research, started to see what works. Very often, as a veterinarian and as a farmer or rancher, you're using powers of observation. Okay, this works, this doesn't. Go from there. And I found that there's a lot of things, there were a lot of botanicals, a lot of products that I would have poo-pooed early years in practice that, oh my gosh, they work. They work. So very gratifying to be able to have that happen. But I took it the next step and thought, well, if it works on an organic dairy, let's just try it on conventional dairies.
Mm.
And the evolution from there was I sold way more organic products to conventional farmers than I did to the organic farmers, partly because the organic farmers had kind of embraced this notion of soil health, diversity, and reducing some of the negatives. And I had no problem with doing it both ways. So as that has gone on, and as there has been the drive now from consumers to have fewer things in their food or to be more aware of how their food is produced, how their animals are raised, that further drives it. So where I am at the moment is that I love to be able to incorporate all types of modalities for both feeding and for treatments, and with continued success. Um, that part about the consumer, I think as time goes on, that will be a driver in of itself. We certainly see it with antibiotic use now, seeing the evolution of going from you could buy any crumbles that you wanted, you could buy antibiotics, you could administer them however you want, to the veterinary feed directives, where there was a control on the fed type of products, and now essentially all antibiotics that would be of significance in the human world are prescription items. So,
Right.
And that's consumer driven.
When we talk about livestock health, I've heard before that a lot of health for humans starts in the gut. Is it similar for livestock? Is that true in their case as well?
That is very true. Yes. When you look at the immune system, and this is certainly something that as time has gone on, there's been more and more research, and there's more and more awareness of it. 70 to 80%, depending on what study you look at, is the estimate of the amount of immune function that is originating in the gut. And along with that, you think about the immune system in the gut, you think about all the things that go on in the gut. There is such a fascinating correlation between what goes on in the gut, the immune system in the gut, and the rest of the body. And kind of the foundation of that is the microbiome. That's a term that's tossed around a bit, and it's a really basic concept. If you just look at a microbiome as being kind of the sum total of all the microorganisms that are going to be in a particular environment. So you have a gut microbiome, you have a respiratory tract microbiome, you have a microbiome on your skin, and they're all going to be different, but they all talk to each other. So when you think about that, and as you kind of explore the different functions of that microbiome, it becomes apparent that we are really dealing with a lot of different microorganisms, heavily to the bacterial side. And it's interesting to think about that, because when you look at the soil, and you look at how many different organisms are there, and then you look at the seawater, you look at the ocean, it's just this complex and massive diversity in numbers of microorganisms. And you realize that all of that is connected. So kind of getting to the antibiotic part of it, when you look at like bacterial resistance to antibiotics, I used to have the notion of, well, how can that possibly happen, because there's no antibiotic residue in this meat? And so how would that affect antibiotic resistance in humans? But because of this vastly interconnected world of microorganisms, then that resistance pattern can be transferred through them. So I like to just kind of visualize in my mind of, okay, if I'm giving an antibiotic to this animal here, or more importantly, if these people are taking an antibiotic, that is going through the system. Say it's going through the soil, say it's going through the water. That's probably one of the biggest carriers, is just water sources. Getting back to convey that resistance. So I've kind of gone to the line of thinking of, and this is straying a bit from your original question, but to the line of thinking of, instead of being so concerned about disinfecting everything and how can we kill off these bacteria, they serve a really, really important purpose. And it's it's valuable to consider them as our friends and to take care of them as such.
Hmm.
So, anyways, going back to the original question, yes, the immune system in the gut is so important, and there's a number of different things that go on in the gut, that correlation that's there. So you have the microbiome. Within the microbiome of, say, your gut, you have approximately 60%, in a good situation. 60% are going to be good bacteria, they'll be your probiotics. 40% are going to be ones that are more pathogenic or have the potential to cause disease. And this is a balance that the body is trying to maintain. That is being influenced a lot by, again, what is being consumed, whether it's human or whether it's an animal, in other factors, other environmental factors also. But within the gut, part of what goes on is you have this exchange of nutrients coming from the inside of the gut into the body through the cell walls, the lining cells of the intestine. And with that, there's a couple main factors. One is there's a mucus layer that is being produced that basically protects those tender, those sensitive cells. Think of it like a layer of Vaseline. Within that mucus layer is where your probiotics interact with the immune cells. And that information is being sent to the brain, to the different organisms. Another thing that happens is that we have tight cell junctions. So people are familiar with the term leaky gut syndrome. What that refers to is that there's the inability of the cells to be adhered tightly to each other. So things from inside the gut have the ability to get into the bloodstream and cause all sorts of inflammatory issues.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's very helpful. I've heard the term many times, but hadn't ever heard it quite defined that way. And so it kind of helps you understand what's going on there. I appreciate that. How can we influence these things positively? How can we make an investment to avoid those things? What are some of the things that you like to see people making a good regular practice in their operation to avoid the expenses by making the investments?
When I look at, I guess there's two ways to approach it. One is, what positives can you put in? And number two, what negatives can you avoid? If we look at the negatives first, when we're talking about ruminants, in my opinion, the single biggest challenge to the gut biome and therefore to the immune system is acidosis. So as we make our ruminants more like pigs, where we're feeding them very high concentrate type diets, very low fiber, very low forage diets, that sets up a rumen pH that is going to be more acidic, would be a lower pH. And that has a profound effect on the diversity and the composition of the bacteria that are going to be in the microbiome. So sometimes simply allowing for a bit more fiber can be a very, very positive aspect in trying to counter that. Just kind of a side note, when it comes to fiber, then the effective fiber is kind of an important part. To be effective, fiber has to have some length. So I will see pelleted rations where it says that it has this much fiber in it. According to composition, it does. According to effectiveness, it really does not. In places, and I've seen this on dairies more so years ago, the practice was, well, you give them plenty of hay and they get corn silage and they might get some haylage, but you feed your grain twice a day and you do it first thing before you feed them anything else. You can end up with some acidosis that way. And in smaller operations, and especially as we get to some of the farms or some of the smaller homestead type operations where they would have a limited number of animals, you might still see that type of thing. So that would be one way to correct a negative. So it's a feeding practice, and it's the composition of the feed. In terms of positives, it kind of goes back to that thing of providing diversity again. Can we make sure that everything, that all those bugs have the opportunity to get what they need to survive? And within that, you can talk about vitamins, you can talk about minerals, you can talk about trace minerals. So it's not only what you're doing that you think you're doing for the animal as a whole, you're also doing it for the bugs in the mine.
Yeah. In your experience, are all trace minerals created equal?
No, they are not. Massive differences that way. I spent a lot of time with people going through mineral type programs. And as I describe what I look for in a mineral, I'm a big believer in bioavailability. How easy is it for the animal to digest and utilize it? There's an inverse relationship there. The cheaper something is, most likely the poorer quality ingredients that are going to be there. And I'm not going to get on a pedestal and say, well, it is a particular feed company or a mill that's doing that. These things are driven by economics, are driven by what consumers would want. Totally understand that game. But within that, if you're making the choice, there are ways that you can choose differently. General rule of thumb, anything that is going to be in a mine or a rock type of situation is going to be poorly absorbed in comparison to other sources. So if you're looking at a feed tag, and if you look at a mineral tag, there's always going to be the list of ingredients, and it's going to go from what is the most common in that mineral to the least common. So you can get some idea from there. If it's saying an oxide, if it's saying it's a carbonate, it's going to be not as well absorbed. Sulfates are kind of in the middle ground. Those have fairly decent absorption rates. And then now there's been more and more forms that are being there that would be tied in with an amino acid, like a glycine. It might say a proteinate, might say amino acid complex, might say a carbohydrate complex. Those are going to be much more available. As a caveat to that,
go ahead.
When I look at minerals and trace minerals, then if it can come from a living organism source, I think it has even a greater bioavailability than commercially prepared ones. So when I'm talking about that or thinking about that, in the organic world, one of the products that's out there is kelp. And kelp is essentially seaweed. And seaweed has things from the ocean in it. It's going to be selectively picking up minerals from that, but it's going to be in the matrix of the plant. Certainly, the simpler example of that is if you think about our crops. If our crops are growing in a environment that they have the trace minerals in it, I'm kind of referring to that because they'll have their own calcium and phosphorus type uptakes. But if you're looking at trace minerals, if it's in the soil, you have soil life, you will have it in your feeds. And that is going to present in a way that is, again, kind of like creation, where that's what it was designed to do and how it was designed to be fed or designed to be digested, I should say.
So I just want to review, make sure I heard you correctly. You said when we're looking at feed tags, things like sulfates, carbonates, and oxides are not as bioavailable. Is that right?
The carbonates and the oxides, not so much. Sulfates are kind of in the middle.
Sure.
So there are a lot of minerals, mineral mixes that are made with sulfates, and performance can be quite good with those too.
Very good. Are there some specific products that you do like that are helpful, that do have better bioavailability?
Yes, there definitely are. If we can just kind of look at things that I look at for supplementation when I'm making recommendations, whether it's doing it for my own animals or if I'm doing it for others, I like to start out with that basic mineral, to have a mineral mix. And on large enough scale, they're formulating things their own way. They're not buying a prepared mineral, but so many people that I work with for convenience sakes or whatever, they're doing that. And like we touched a bit on the trace minerals. And when I talk about trace minerals and a mineral mix, it's what I would consider to be the macro trace minerals. It will be things like Selenium, even though you don't need it in large quantities, but that's very important. Zinc and copper are going to be very important. You'll see cobalt, you'll see manganese, magnesium a lot of times is going to be listed in there. And you're going to have generally a calcium phosphorus type of base for it. And those are going to be typically either like a calcium carbonate or a dicalcium phosphate or a monocalcium phosphate. And then you will have typically a vitamin A, D, and E in there also. So that's kind of a base. From there, I like to have a additional vitamin A, D, and E fed from a separate bag, just the vitamin A, D, and E source. And the reason for that being vitamin A, D, and E are not expensive products. And I'm sure that they are incorporated in every mineral or everything that has a guaranteed analysis of that. But the potential for those vitamins to get denatured over time, and over time being a matter of even a couple months, if it's a product that is pelleted or exposed to high heat, they'll be denatured. If it's in the presence of sodium chloride of salt, presence of iron, or just the passage of time, those vitamins will denature. So I've had great success in many situations of being able to add in at the time of feeding a vitamin A, D, and E source. And the third component to that is you would always have a necessity to have salt incorporated into a ration. And here is where the product that I really, really like is called C90. It's a sea mineral. And this is a product from Sea Agri, is the name of the company. And it is what I would consider to be a new or alive salt or mineral salt. And for our listeners, I don't know if they're familiar with that or not, but when you look at the different salts that are out there, there can be just your plain white salt, which would be sodium chloride. There can be the trace mineral salts, either as loose or blocks, that will have some of the copper, zinc, and that in there. And then you get the range of what they call the sea salts. And of the sea salts, you have ones that are going to be mined, and you have ones that are going to be, as I would describe it, as being new. And of those, C90 is one that I use, very commercially available. That would be the new sea salt. This salt is produced, as I have heard or I've visited with the folks from the company, in the Sea of Cortez, which would be a little area between Baja Peninsula in Mexico, where there's seawater that's very, very rich in nutrients. It's warm water. There's some geological type activity that increases some of the trace minerals in there. And this salt is harvested essentially by having tide pools that are flooded, and the water is evaporated by wind and sun, so that it's not exposed to any high heat. What really excites me about that, couple things. One is that it's in the order of 20% trace minerals, as compared to a lot of the other sea salts that would be out there. And it is very, very rich in biological activity. So if you look at all the bacteria and the algae and the protozoa and the fungi and the viruses that are there, a lot of these trace minerals are going to be incorporated within that. We've done this on our farm for probably 5 years. We use our little farm as a little test farm here, and have used it in practice and kind of in consulting around the country for 2 or 3 years here now. And that has just made a significant difference. It's kind of that concept again of you're providing everything that animal could want in terms of trace minerals. And when we talk about trace minerals, I didn't say this before, but just the importance of trace minerals in one of the important things is that they're part of enzymes. Enzymes run the bodies. And if you have the correct trace mineral to associate with to produce the correct enzyme, that is the most efficient way for processes to happen. Our bodies or our animals' bodies are so adaptable that if one pathway doesn't work, if you're missing a trace mineral, it'll try to do it another way. Instead of going point A to point B, it goes A to B to C. The more things you're lacking, the more inefficient it is. So whether it's health, whether it's production, whether it's reproduction, having the ability for the body to pick and choose what it needs to produce those enzymes is an efficiency. And I definitely look at that one, even though the price might be a bit more, again, than what some of the other products would be. But that is really, really one product that I would not want to have in my arsenal with feed and supplementation.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think we've been doing a lot of work with C90 over the last couple of years to try and make sure people do know about C90, and it's available nationwide at Tractor Supply, and it's been a great product at our house. We use it as well, and I think that a couple of things you've alluded to here that set it apart in my mind is, like you said, it's in the Sea of Cortez. You alluded to the geological activity that's happening there. It is right at the mouth of the fault line where a lot of those minerals are getting ground up and kind of they're getting washed out into the ocean right there where they're doing that work. And so there's a lot of that stuff that's being pulled up from deep in the earth and coming out right there where they're doing their work and providing those things. And then the other thing you talked about was that it's 80% or some percentage salt, and then it's 20% these trace minerals, and I think that's where the C90 name comes from. It's 90 trace minerals, on top of that. And just from my family's health, my mother-in-law has been watching her sodium for a number of years, and so we've been using the Baja Gold sea salt as a family, and we've been providing that to my in-laws because it is lower sodium, but you still get the salt flavor, and in my opinion, better salt flavor. So I think it's probably the same for the cows, right? They appreciate those things as well.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks for mentioning the Baja Gold. We, in our household here, we consider ourselves to be salt snobs now. Possibly the folks at Sea Agri wouldn't want me to say that, but before the Baja Gold was there, we would just always take a little pinch out of the start of the bag when we do it for the cattle. Yeah. But it really it has a unique taste. We carry it with us when we go traveling now.
Yeah. Yeah. And it keeps getting better. The most recent shipment of Baja Gold sea salt I received was way more user friendly than the first stuff. I think it was easier in a grinder, and it worked and it flowed through the grinder well and all those things. It's my afternoon snack most days when I'm in the office is popcorn made with coconut oil and some Baja Gold sea salt on it. So that's my afternoon snack generally.
That's good. There's another form of it now that is, and possibly you've mentioned this before, that it's in a concentrated liquid form too, if people like to just be able to add it to a beverage or something.
Yeah, I do in my house. I make Gatorade, homemade Gatorade, a little bit of honey, lemon, fresh squeezed lemon, and Baja Gold Ocean Power concentrate. That's what we do at our house when we're in the hot summer days out building fence or, whatever we're doing. That's a real good way to rehydrate, I think. And then we also do the brine water for our cattle. So we make Gatorade for our cows too, but I don't put any lemon or honey in theirs. It's probably as important to have those type of things in the house as it is for our livestock, for sure. You mentioned brine water there. That's something that really encourage people to do, especially when you have weaned animals, because that's the time when I can convince people to do that. And for people that aren't familiar with that, a brine tank is essentially just a water tank that has salt in it, or has some form of salt in it. And again, the C90 is definitely my go-to. I know their recommendations are like roughly 6 pounds per 100 gallons of water. And for myself, call me a rebel or whatever, but I'll stick to about 2 pounds for
for my brine tanks, and you always would have available water, another source too, just plain water available for them. But part of it's kind of cattle behavior. Is that if there's a tank there, there's something to ding with, and so they just can't help themselves but get over there and drink. And certainly for a lot of cattle that aren't familiar with a captive water source as opposed to a pond or a river or a stream, it's really important that they're able to gather around, because that's kind of the herd part of it. So that a very easy thing, very cheap investment to be able to improve the health of those weaned animals. And kind of getting to that, I didn't mention before, but when you just think about water itself, just how important that is for kind of all functions. Look at the percentage that our bodies, our animals' bodies, is water, and you look at how important hydration is, and especially in weaned animals where they have this very consistent source of liquid, and all of a sudden they don't. And weaned calves they're bellowing, they're making a lot of racket. Throats are getting dry. A dry, dehydrated respiratory system is just an open door for the bacteria to get in to cause pneumonias. So you can decrease that shipping fever significantly just by hydrating them. And if you're hydrating them, you may as well do it so that they're getting the electrolytes with it. So simple things that can make such a difference.
Yeah, could we talk a little bit about the seasonality of some of these supplementations, and some of the things that we should be paying attention to during different times? I mean, we're talking here in the fall, we're talking about weaning time, we're talking about fall shots. Today, we've been very hot and dry all the way through September and October, which is not good for us because we need some fall moisture for the cool season grasses and stuff like that. And so today I said before we started recording that I was helping preg check some cows, and it was dusty. There was we haven't had rain for a long time. And so it was very dusty, sorting and moving things up into the alleyway and some of those things. So obviously different times of year are going to require some different strategies, and maybe we focus more on having some of these things available at certain times of year than the others. Can you talk about how you think about some of those things?
So the big one that I would think of, and I see this in a lot of situations pertaining to pink eye, as our cool season grasses go into that suspended state of growth in hot, dry conditions, the beta carotene, therefore the vitamin A potential for them is greatly reduced. And we tend to think that, well, they're on pasture, so it shouldn't be an issue. But part of a pink eye control program is to provide additional vitamin A for those animals. So AD&E supplement that I would have mentioned previously, really good thing to have in there. And when I'm looking at how do you easily get things in, I like to have that C90 as being kind of a base or a carrier for having animals get whatever else I want to get into them. And you're not going to denature your vitamin A, D, and E if it's put in a mineral feeder with C90 mineral salt for a few days or a week. But that's a real easy way to do that. Obviously, as we get into stored feed or winter feeding, then all three of those, the A, D, and E, are going to be important because they're not going to be getting it from the sunshine or the fresh grass. So that one would be very important at that point too. When can you cut back on that? Probably when you get good spring grass, spring flush of grass, not going to be that critical. In the fall of the year, if you have good moisture and good growth, not going to be a big issue there either. In terms of looking at intakes for animals of the minerals, if you're looking at salt intakes, that's going to be a function of weather. My approach to it is kind of allow them to have the opportunity to take it when they want it. And so I don't change a program a great deal other than like what I said for the AD&E, in terms of providing it for the animals to have it free choice. And I know there's so many different systems. If a person has the opportunity to feed it on a regular basis, as a force fed or as part of something else. If you have a bunk, we have kind of a cheap man's TMR type thing. It's just a feeder wagon that we run our silage through. And my wife is extremely diligent about making sure they get some top dressed of our mixture with that, but we still provide a free choice. There's within the ability of an animal to pick and choose what it wants. If you look at behavior, and if you look at average mineral consumption or average salt consumption, the average really isn't a true indicator of who's eating what, because there's some that really like it, and there's some that really are opposed to it. So the average might be good, but it certainly doesn't accomplish all that you want.
What about enticers? Do you recommend enticing? Do you try to get a certain consumption per animal throughout the year, throughout certain seasons on some of these supplementations?
Yes and no. I feel salt's always going to be a driver. They're always going to be after that. So when you have the stress periods, that's when I think if you don't have the ability to have it incorporated within a feeding system, when you have the stress periods, that's a good time, I think, to put something else in. And for myself, if I can incorporate molasses either as a liquid or a dry, is going to be my first choice. Part of it is when you look at what molasses does in the gut, when you look at the effect of molasses on the microbiome, very, very positive effect. So that'll kind of be a go-to one. We talked about the brine tank in dry conditions like what you just described, just having that, even if it's not in a stress period, having the opportunity for them to do that, I think can be beneficial. And if one looks at some of those major trace minerals, the multi-min type injection is certainly something that is used quite extensively also. It's another step. It's handling animals. If you can do it while the animals are being handled for another reason, that's a possibility also. Lick tubs are awesome. And again, a lot of the lick tubs are going to be molasses based. So there you have that benefit. Again, lick tubs are going to be ones that are heated in order to be produced. So we're going to have that same issue with vitamins when we're doing that. But that's a nice way to do it also.
Is there anything else, other products that can contribute to optimize gut health and immune function? Things that you typically say, hey, maybe look at this during certain times of the years or seasons?
It is part of what I do. I work with kind of alongside of a number of other companies. And they're companies that I work with because I believe in the products. They provide opportunities for me to use things and to have access to things that I'd like to incorporate in. So I'll kind of use that as just kind of the lead into it. There is a company called Imogene Ingredients out of Iowa, and they have a tannin. It's called Pharmatan. And it's a sweet chestnut tannin. It comes from Slovenia, which is over in Europe. And it is, I got involved with it. It's an organic product. It's not a relisted product. But this one has the ability to provide a lot of benefits to that leaky gut type of situation that I was talking about, opportunities to increase that mucus layer in the gut. And it also has the ability to do antiquarm sensing, which I'll come back to that. But I've seen great reductions in the amount of calf scours that we have by feeding that product as part of this mix, going in, starting 3 months prior to the calving season, and then going a couple months after the bulk of the calving season is done. This one also has the ability to kind of improve protein utilization, and one of these things that's on the horizon, it does decrease the methane production that happens in the rumen. So it has some indications there also as time goes on. So I like to use that one. I work with another company. It's called Impro Products out of Iowa. And they have a colostral whey product that is rather unique and has a very profound effect on the immune system by being fed and being given orally. And how that works is it is the ability to modulate the immune system. So when we're talking about the immune system and we're talking about stimulating it, a stimulant means that it's going to kick it into a higher gear. Modulation means that it's going to do something that's appropriate for what's going on with the body, with the animal, with the immune system. And an example of that would be if you look at pneumonias. When you have a full-blown pneumonia going in a calf, and they have a hard time breathing, and they're just struggling to get air, and they can't breathe, so they're not going to eat, they're not going to drink. In conventional world, I would use a steroid to kind of knock back the immune system so that we don't get as much congestion, we don't have as much fluid that's accumulating in the lungs. In kind of the organic and the natural world, and again in parallel, some of these whey products can make a difference with that too. Incidentally, I do use some of that product in my brine tank at times also. I recommend that. And what's unique about the Impro particular company is that they have their own herd of cows. And they hyperimmunize individual cows with individual organisms so they can kind of custom tailor the whey products that are going to be most beneficial. I work with Dr. Paul's Labs, which is a national, actually an international company that produces kind of natural and organic product lines. So we're able to utilize some of that, say, for natural deworming. There's kind of an increase in resistance of our parasites to some of the chemical type of warmers. So this provides an option even in conventional settings for people to be able to have some room control. And a lot of that is going to be going under the auspices of improving that gut health, making it easier for those animals to be able to resist reinfections or reinfestations. So those are some of the things that I will use. Certainly don't have the time to be able to go through individually on recommendations with that. Hopefully you'll be able to provide people with my contact information if they're more interested in learning about that. One thing that I have to throw in about is this quorum sensing, anti-quorum sensing.
Yeah.
And this one just fascinates me. So the way to describe that in simplistic terms, and perhaps you've covered this before in other podcasts, but what happens, we said that we have about 60% beneficial bacteria in the gut, and there's about 40% that could be potentially disease-causing. When you look at what those potentially disease-causing organisms do, is very often they're going to be normal inhabitants in our gut. They certainly will be normal inhabitants in our respiratory tract. And they send out signals, little molecular signals that say, hey, I'm over here. Why don't you come join me? So I use the example of in the gut, say you have some salmonella organisms, and there's one here, and there's one there, and there's one over there. They send these signals out. That's called quorum sensing. And when these receptors get attached to the signals that are sent out, then they get together. And when they get together in sufficient quantities, then they will form what's called a biofilm, which is a protective structure that makes it difficult for anything natural or antibiotic to be able to get to them. And at that point, they can change pathogenicity, which means they can just be hanging out in the gut in this situation, and now all of a sudden they can produce a more pathogenic type of organism that can cause disease. So anti-quorum sensing just simply means that you are providing a product, and most of the time these are just natural products that are going to block that. So you still have, think of it like having a layer of insurance. You might have the organisms there, you might be stressing the animals, but there's one more thing that's preventing it from taking over and causing disease. Number of different products and botanicals that do that.
Yeah.
And it's really fun to watch how beneficial that can be.
I appreciate that very much. The Show notes page for today will be workingcows.net/389. So I'll have links to some of the stuff we've talked about today, links also to Dr. Tom's contact information if you want to reach out to him, talk a little bit more about some of these other products. But as I said earlier, C90 Ocean Minerals available nationwide, right for herds of any size. We use it at our house and just a small flock of sheep and some milk cows and horses and all that. So very good. Appreciate the time that you have given us today. Have we missed anything or glossed over anything that needs to be said here before we let you go?
With regards to the C90 observations that I've had, and for people that are making a transition from the source that they have now for a salt mineral to C90, what I have seen in practice is initially consumption can go up. So the scenario is people will start with C90 and they realize that it might be a bit more pricey. They might not understand investment versus expense. And I will get comments like, "Oh my gosh, doc, this is hey, this is costing me more." And so just be patient. And then after the animals have kind of satiated whatever need they're trying to fill, the consumption will go down to be less than what it is with whatever source they were using before.
Yep, I have absolutely seen that. Multiple herds now. We do custom grazing in the summer, and so we bring in outside cattle during the growing season. And the first 2 weeks that those herds are there, we're going through a lot of salt. And then they kind of get balanced out, like you said, and they'll slow down quite a bit. And then, I think during some of those later summer times when it's hot and dry and stressed and there's some stress and some of those things, some of the nutrient availability isn't coming from the plants like it was, they'll go back to it. And we've seen that for sure as well in our experience. But yeah, you might as well just take 1 or 2 bags out with you every time you go to move the cows, because they're going to eat them both for the first couple weeks anyways. So yep, definitely see that.
One other thing I would mention, a relatively new product, C90 has a block now that has the Pharmatan in it. And that is one that I would have been involved with the testing initially. And that is a very nice way to be able to incorporate both of those products in a convenient block form also. So be aware of that part of it also.
Very good. Yeah, I appreciate that.
And even though it isn't my forte or my department, but to be able to get that product out in the fields or on the pastures to increase that nutrient density. And it's always that thought of how can we be more diverse? How can we follow creation as opposed to resisting the diversity that's out there? Yep. It's a very important part.
Partner with nature, work in synchrony with nature as God designed it, as Understanding Ag would say, working in synchrony with nature. That's the goal, rather than looking at it as something that's an antagonist towards us, right?
Yes, very well said. Very well put.
All right. Well, Dr. Tom, I thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for allowing me to have this format to be able to visit with you. It's been a pleasure.
Very good stuff there with Dr. Tom. Really appreciate his time today and just making that connection, and look forward to maybe future conversations with him about other tactics that he has used successfully over the years for integrated herd health approaches. Coming your way real soon on another episode of the Working Cows podcast, we'll be talking to John Moody, and we're going to talk to John about fighting mandatory radio frequency ID, RFID. And John's just a real enjoyable guy to talk to, kind of a touchy subject, but fun to talk to, and really look forward to sharing that conversation with you coming your way real soon on another episode of the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.